Hello, Archie Dunlop here with Talking Astrology with Archie on Monday, March the 17th, 2025. Today, as usual, I'm going to be talking about the astrology and the I Ching for the day, and I also want to look at a recent murder in Ukraine, and it took place in Odesa last week, and it happened in broad daylight, and the man murdered was a Ukrainian nationalist and activist, someone who had been associated with one of the right-wing groupings in Ukraine, the Right Sector, appropriately named. And the thing about this murder is that it happened at an exact time. We really know what time he was murdered. It happened on Friday, March the 14th at 10:28:56 in the morning. And the reason we know that is because the CCTV footage is all over the internet. So, that is quite unusual. That was when the final coup de grace was delivered by the murderer. The man was already on the pavement, injured, and you can see that at 10:28:56, the final shot was fired. So from an astrological point of view, that is certainly interesting. And as far as the victim is concerned, Demyan Hanul, he was an interesting person. He had a Facebook page. He posted loads of stuff to it, and so we kind of get sort of an almost sort of rounded individual here, a rounded character, and we know what date he was born. And so I thought in this video I thought it would be a good idea to sort of look at his chart. I don't have his time of birth. Look at when he was killed. I also consider that other big event in his life that took place on May the 2nd, 2014. And interestingly, the European Court of Human Rights has just pronounced, the day before he was killed, the European Court of Human Rights pronounced on this and took the view that the Ukrainian government at the time had not done enough to prevent the tragedy taking place. But, it's a complicated thing, and I'm just trying to be as unbiased as possible, and trying to look at it objectively, and yes, to look at this person, Demyan Hanul, as a real human being, and he would appear to have certain character traits which really are laudable. And there's actually, interestingly, there's one thing that Demyan Hanul absolutely detests, and that same thing Vladimir Putin also detests. So they have an interesting thing in common, but I'll be looking at that later in the video. But first of all, I want to consider the astrology and the I Ching for today, which is Monday, March 17th, 2025. Usual reminder, if you happen to like this video, I'd be very grateful if you were indeed to like it. And if you're not subscribed, I would be super grateful if you were to subscribe, because it does make a difference to the channel. So here is the astrology for today, or rather the chart for New York set for noon. And the first thing that we might notice is the fact the moon is now in Scorpio. At noon, it's at 4 degrees 11 Scorpio. So the moon is at its degree of fall at 3 Scorpio. So in terms of placement, the moon is really badly placed, and moon in Scorpio is a sign where the moon is fallen. It's perhaps a sign where the moon is just too brooding. It can't express itself in a clear and constructive way very often. And additionally, the moon is in the Via Combusta, the part of the sky between 15 Libra and 15 Scorpio. So when the moon is in very early Scorpio, it's like the Via Combusta is at its worst. And things can happen that we weren't really expecting. But some of you watching this, I suppose 1 in 12 of you watching this, will have your moon in Scorpio, and there's nothing wrong with having the moon in Scorpio. If it's something like the moon in Scorpio, you've got it in Scorpio and it's in your natal chart, you work out how to deal with it, and it's good for you. But when we look at the moon in Scorpio in general, not necessarily in a personal chart, but what is it like when the moon is in Scorpio? It could be a little bit difficult, and in this case, the moon is conjunct true black moon Lilith, which does create a certain darkness and perhaps intensifies the brooding nature of the moon in Scorpio. Though on the plus side, the moon is in Scorpio, which is the sign of Mars, and Mars is in Cancer. So the moon and Mars are actually in mutual reception. So it's not like the moon is entirely weak. There is certainly a major mitigator there. And so the moon has its own power. And that means that if we want to be intense and brooding, and if we want to give the impression that we are serious and assertive and we really want to get our way and it has to happen and our desires are made absolutely clear, perhaps we can benefit from the moon being in Scorpio. And to further intensify the moon in Scorpio, it is making a square to Pluto. So moon conjunct black moon Lilith and square to Pluto means it's a very focused moon, and we kind of know what we want. And yes, the principle of desire is going to be important, but some of us may find it quite difficult to express our feelings. Maybe it's just not the right time. And another aspect we've got is Mercury making a semi-square to Uranus. So Mercury has just gone retrograde. There it is at 9 degrees 12 Aries, and it is semi-square Uranus, 45 degrees from Uranus. And we have powerful thoughts, intensified perhaps by the fact that the moon is in Scorpio. And those thoughts could be disruptive. We may start to see things in a different way. Also, we can get agitated. Mercury can get agitated, particularly if it's semi-square Uranus. And we might do things, or particularly say things, which no one expects. And if we do try to be open about our real feelings and our thoughts as well, the impression we get, might not be as expected, especially as the moon is in the Via Combusta. So if you want to say something important, then really think it through and ask yourself whether this is really the right time. Now, if you want to have an impact, today might be the day to do it. So it's quite an intense picture today astrologically, but it's quite single-minded. There aren't that many aspects today, just moon in Scorpio, moon square Pluto, Mercury semi-square Uranus, and that's it. And I think that the main thing is that think about our thoughts and our feelings and how we want to express things, and maybe we just shouldn't express them at all. So that's a picture in New York at noon. So if we were to look at the horoscope set for Sydney, Australia at noon, then at noon in Sydney, Australia, the moon is in at 26 Libra. So the moon is still in the Via Combusta if you're in Australia or New Zealand, but the moon doesn't actually go into Scorpio until late in the day, until the evening. So a lot of that stuff, what I was saying about moon in Scorpio, if you are in Australia or New Zealand or Eastern Asia, possibly doesn't apply until late in the day. So maybe it's not going to be quite so intense a day, and you might have more choice and things could be a bit more relaxed, and to sort of enjoy the moon moving through the last degrees of Libra and sort of enjoy some of the harmony that might provide. And then there is the heliocentric picture. If we set everything from viewpoint of the sun, and the Earth is in Virgo, late Virgo, and it's starting to apply to an opposition of Neptune. And that tells us something that we already know by looking at the geocentric picture, and that is that the sun is making a conjunction to Neptune. It's one and the same thing. But with Earth opposition Neptune, you might say that that creates a certain amount of misunderstanding, confusion. Do we really know what's going on? You know, the Earth, here is us on this planet. We are trying to make sense of it all, but it's not always easy. And there are things that we're puzzling over, and it's possible that we make mistakes. I mean, that really can happen. So we mustn't get too into our feelings today. And we mustn't take our feelings at face value. Just because we get a powerful impression about something or somebody does not mean that that's the end of the matter. You know, we might have got it wrong. And so, you know, especially with Mercury going retrograde, it might be a bad idea to be making up our minds about anything. Also, we've got Venus making a square to Jupiter, so we have a bit of a T-square going on here involving Venus and Saturn. So Venus has just made the opposition to Saturn, and then it's starting to make a square to Jupiter. And again, as I like to say with this Jupiter-Saturn square, it is connected with the economy and with how we feel about the economy. Because, you know, this chart, this heliocentric chart, is quite collective. It's not quite so personal as a geocentric chart. And with Venus aspecting the Jupiter-Saturn square, you know, there are concerns that have been sort of running for the last week. Well, these concerns have probably been going a lot longer, but Venus is just triggering that Jupiter-Saturn square. In fact, the Earth is triggering it as well. And so we are perhaps asking, you know, what we can afford. People are asking what they can afford because they're not really particularly sure about the future. At least that might be one manifestation of Venus opposition Saturn, Venus square Jupiter. Though with Venus making a square to Jupiter, it may be that some people just need to do something excessive, spend money maybe, because they want to respond to the limitations they feel. It's just all too much. It's all a bit difficult, maybe even a little bit grim, Venus opposition Saturn. And so Venus square Jupiter wants to cheer everyone up. People want to cheer themselves up, and they might do that or try to do that through indulgent behavior, but I'm not particularly sure that is a good idea. So having done the heliocentric chart, or looked at it, I want to consider today from the viewpoint of the 12 signs. So these are my forecasts for the 12 signs for today, which is Monday, March the 17th, 2025. Aries. Aries, you still have Venus and Mercury moving through your sign. Both planets are now retrograde, and this means that, you know, if you are an Aries, you're going to feel that you're going to want to assert yourself. You're going to want to speak freely, and you're going to want to be noticed. And if you've got an opinion, you'll certainly want to be heard. But the question is, you know, how effective are you actually going to be? Because, you know, we do now have the moon moving through Scorpio, and this moon moving through Scorpio may be asking you to be a little more considered. The straightforward and direct way is not always the best approach. might get you into trouble, or you just might feel that you can't really apply yourself properly. But there are many ways of doing things, and the moon may be in Scorpio, which is certainly a difficult placement for the moon, but it is in mutual reception to Mars. Moon and Mars are in each other's signs, and of course Mars is your ruler. So it's actually not so bad that the moon is in Scorpio. It does make you powerful, but you have to handle the moon in Scorpio in the right way. If you try to be direct and loud and obnoxious, then you're unlikely to have a very successful day. People will just recoil from you. On the other hand, with that moon in Scorpio, if you are subtle, if you do things in a slow, roundabout fashion, and you're not in a hurry, and you use your manipulative skills and your emotional sensitivity. Yes, you can be emotionally sensitive when you want to be. If you use that, then you can get real results, and people will listen to you. And in your own way, you can certainly, Aries, be extremely persuasive. It just may take a little bit longer than expected. So it's just very important here that you are not impatient. Everything will happen when the time is right. And by adopting that approach, I think that you can have a powerful day when, in the end, you can get your way. Taurus, the external dimension can't really be avoided. People do matter, and one reason for this is that the moon is moving into Scorpio, and of course Scorpio is your opposite sign. So always when the moon moves into Scorpio, you do have to consider the other person. It's not you taking all the initiatives, and you need to respond, and you need to show some sympathy to other people, even if you don't like them or appreciate them. And it may also be the case that you have to accept that you're not quite as powerful as you would like to be. In many respects, some people hold all the cards, or at least most of the cards. And one reason for that is that the moon, although it's in Scorpio in the sign of its fall, it is in mutual reception to Mars. And that moon in mutual reception to Mars, does give certain people a strength which you might not appreciate, but you certainly have to accept. And you have to watch what they're doing, consider it all, and just respond accordingly. And you don't always have to be the one responding. You don't always have to be the one acting. You can actually watch what other people are doing and then make your own decision. And additionally, consider the way you feel and consider your attitude, because at the moment some Taurians might have a fairly negative attitude. You might be of a view that really nothing is going to work, that there's not much point in doing anything, that maybe things will just go from bad to worse. So there is this negativity that you have. Now, I don't think that this negativity is real, is based on objective facts, but it might just be the way, but just in general, the way you respond to things, and there might be a certain grimness there, an awareness even of your own mortality, aware of mortality in general. And when you see references to death and destruction, it just might have more of an impact than usual. But don't take it too seriously, and It's just not a time where you have to be bringing your own material to the table. Let other people take the initiative, see what other people have got to offer, and maybe someone's actions can empower you, but it might not seem obvious at the time, and that might be related to the fact that the moon is square Pluto. So there may be a situation with moon square Pluto that you feel that someone is throwing their weight around, is wanting to be in control, but that's only because you're looking at it in one way. If you look at it in another way, you may be given an opportunity, and just because another person is powerful doesn't mean that you lose power. It's actually possible that you might benefit from another person demonstrating the power of their personality. Gemini, you feel that it's a time when a certain amount of caution is required, and you're at the same time very aware of your obligations, just things you have to do. You don't want to do them, but once you get going, you can actually be quite successful. So if there's something you're trying to sort out and you don't really want to sort it out, then it might just be time to bite the bullet and just to go for it. And you will then be able to cover a lot of ground very quickly, and just don't ask too many questions, because if you ask too many questions, then you might sort of analyze what you're doing and why you're doing it, and it might just feel really not something you want to do. Just consider that number one priority, the thing you've been avoiding for days, if not weeks, and put your mind to it. I understand that Mercury is moving retrograde. Mercury is your ruler. When it's retrograde, there can be problems, and Mercury is going to be in retrograde for the next 3 weeks. But there are certain advantages in Mercury being retrograde, even if you're a Gemini. And one advantage about Mercury being in retrograde is that you have an opportunity to reconsider things and to go back over old ground. And maybe that's what you need to do. Maybe that's what you need to do. It's always boring going back over old ground, especially if you're a Gemini. It's absolutely the last thing you want to do. You've done it, you've moved on, it's finished. And the problem about going back over old ground, it just is one of the worst things. Because you've got a fast mind, but sometimes it's the right thing to do. And of course, with Mercury going retrograde, if you're in the US, of course, that coincides pretty much with the run up to the tax season, and so that if you're a Gemini in the United States, tax might be a particular concern, and that really is going back over old ground, having to consider what you did financially months and months ago. Even if you're not in the US, you might be, in a financial sense, thinking about what you did, what happened, and in certain cases, it's possible that you might have to deal with the consequences of something financially, not necessarily serious consequences, but it's all starting to come home. And additionally, Gemini, there may be a feeling that you don't have as much power as you'd like to have. Maybe today there's something you really would like to be doing, some initiative, you feel it's just really important to you, and you can't do it. And that is really annoying, and you have to just accept that and not be frustrated. And in general Gemini, it's about understanding the priority, and it's understanding about what you're supposed to be doing at this particular time. And at this particular time, you're supposed to be doing stuff which is fairly detailed, which requires careful work, attention to detail, and focus. And if you can do all that, then it won't be so bad. And indeed, through your attention to detail, there may be actually a surprising gain. Cancer. Cancer, moon is in Scorpio, and the moon is actually in mutual reception to Mars. So, recently, every time the moon moves into Scorpio, it is in mutual reception to Mars. And that's because Mars is in Cancer. Now, Mars is not going to stay in Cancer forever. You do have one more iteration. So in April, in a month's time, the moon will go into Scorpio again, and Mars will still be in Cancer. And therefore, the moon and Mars will be in mutual reception. In May, when the moon moves into Scorpio, Mars will not be in Cancer anymore. It will be in Leo. So that will be different. But right now, moon moving into Scorpio, for all the negative things one might say about moon in Scorpio, but right now for you, Cancer, moon in Scorpio is a great placement for the moon. And it allows you to be yourself, to take yourself seriously at the same time, and also just to be powerful. And you get noticed, you get appreciated, and you can do things that you enjoy. And, additionally, you can explore areas which are a bit dangerous, not horribly dangerous, but dangerous perhaps in an emotional sense. And that is because the moon is making a conjunction to true black moon Lilith today. And it's kind of an interesting conjunction because it's taking place very close to the moon's degree of maximum fall. So the moon is fallen at 3 degrees Scorpio because its degree of exaltation is 3 degrees Taurus. I'm not really sure if I'm able to talk about maximum fall in a Western context, because in Vedic astrology there is this concept of maximum fall that in Vedic astrology, as the moon gets closer and closer to 3 degrees Scorpio, of course that's sidereal 3 degrees Scorpio, as it gets closer it starts to lose strength. And I don't think that is a Western concept. I may be wrong on that, but I do take the view, perhaps I'm borrowing from a Vedic approach, that as the moon approaches 3 degrees Scorpio, it does weaken. And 3 degrees Scorpio, we've got true black moon Lilith, and you might say that is something incredibly negative, but I'm not convinced, but simply because the moon is in mutual reception to Mars, and I think that Cancer, you can actually benefit by dealing with things that just other people don't want to touch, and that may be a Cancerian trait. I mean, Cancer is a water sign. Cancer understands that nothing is as it seems, and sometimes Cancer wants to shy away from what's going on under the surface. But I think today you can benefit from really getting to grips with difficult subjects, and from an artistic point of view, what is difficult can also be highly creative and original, and maybe it is because you're going into areas that other people don't want to touch, and that can be a very important part of your self-expression. And with that moon making a moon in mutual reception to Mars, do not underestimate your own power. Cancerians are people who you should never take on. It's very, very difficult to get the better of a Cancerian. And that's especially the case today, when the moon is in mutual reception to Mars. And so if there's something that you want to push through, even if the odds appear to be against you, then I think actually there's an excellent chance that you will get your way. And maybe your advantage is that you can do things, say things, think things that other people can't do. And so there may actually be, in a subtle way, a certain sense of shock about the way you present yourself. And if people are surprised or shocked, then they might be less willing to put up any resistance. So if there are things you want today, and you really want them, and we're talking about desire, then there's a good chance you'll get them. Though you have to think about the consequences of what you're doing, about the consequences of what you're doing, the consequences of what you're asking for. Just because you get what you're asking for doesn't mean that you should always be pleased with yourself. Sometimes you get what you're asking for, and that's not actually what you wanted when you consider the implications. So think about the concept of desire, and ask yourself, how far do you want to push it? Leo, the Sun is your ruler, and the Sun is conjunct the North Node. And I would have said that the Sun conjunct the North Node is quite fortunate. I regard the North Node as being a fortunate point in the chart, and traditionally the North Node is seen to be of the nature of Jupiter, and the South Node of the nature of Saturn. And so with the Sun conjunct the North Node today, you do have a certain amount of luck. Something wants you to be successful, but that doesn't mean to say that success is guaranteed. You have to do what is right for you. And that's very important with the North Node. The North Node at the moment is in Pisces, and it is asking you, Leo, to be subtle. It's also asking you to be aware of the power of your own and other people's feelings. It is a complicated world in which you're living. In fact, it's a complicated world in which we're all living. But you need to appreciate these subtleties and not sort of rush around and feel that you have to do things directly, that you have to get loads of attention. And if you're looking for a head-on confrontation, well, I don't think that's going to work. But if you're prepared to look beyond surface details, go deeply into things, perhaps more deeply than you'd really like to do, but if you can do that, then I think in many cases the universe is going to smile on you, and things will start working out for you. And don't be afraid of information. Information can be scary. We might think we don't want to know something. We'd rather be in ignorance. But that is not logical. And you should know that it's not logical. It's not just not logical, it's not right. And the more you know, the more powerful you are. And if you know about stuff that's bad, you've been trying to avoid confronting something. I mean, it could be financial. I suppose it could be about your health. I'm not saying anything about your health here, but it's just an example. Or the truth about another person. Whatever it is, confront it now. And it will be liberating. And, the sooner you accept the truth, the better for everyone, and in particular, the better for you. And also, don't expect things to be in black and white. It's nice if everything is clear and unambiguous, but today there is going to be a lot of ambiguity, and you might be looking for the truth, and you might be looking for a yes or a no answer, and you might not get that. you might realize how complicated things really are. And that in itself is a knowledge of the truth, accepting the truth, and also accepting that the truth is not straightforward. And so that is the kind of approach that, ideally you should be taking. And also, you should be trying to do things in your own way, at your own pace. So you can be busy, but you don't want to be seen to be busy. You don't have to be seen to be busy. Nothing you do today needs to be in the public eye. And in fact, by working behind the scenes, you'll be discovering the things you need to discover. And in that way, today can actually be quite enlightening. May even be a little bit liberating. Especially if you can get a little bit closer to the truth, because once you understand what things really are, then that could take a big weight off your shoulders. Virgo, you are actually quite an effective communicator at the moment, but you probably don't feel like you are. You might feel that it's just best to just say nothing. Is anyone really interested? And if you were to say what was on your mind, it might just make things worse. But it's not just the things you say that matter. It's the way you say it. And at the moment, Virgo, you're able to exercise a certain amount of restraint in terms of what you say, and that restraint is crucial. It allows you to concentrate on the things that matter, and additionally, you understand the people you're talking with, and you understand what they can deal with, and you're not going to take things too far. So that restraint that you feel is really good. You can feel your own power, but you also know that you can't release that power, not yet. And in general, that is going to be really appreciated. And communication is a two-way thing. And in many cases, Virgo, you're going to understand things without having to ask. And with the moon making a conjunction to true black moon Lilith, then you'll be very sensitive to what's hurting people and to things that are being hidden, things that might be rather unpleasant that are being hidden, that people don't want to talk about, don't want to discuss, but you'll just know about it. And you'll just have an intuitive feeling, and you'll just know where you should go and where you shouldn't go. And so in terms of other people, you'll have a good sense of their boundaries. And in many cases, you can find answers without having to ask questions. It's just going to be obvious to you. And that might mean that you have the capacity to look beyond the facts and to be able to consider surface appearances, but then be able to ask yourself, what lies beyond whatever's going on the surface, and you can really understand things and really enlighten yourself. And additionally, Virgo, it's possibly a good Monday for finding things out. Perhaps for doing some detective work. If there are mysteries, these mysteries can be solved. And additionally, you might have sudden inspirations that may not be especially comfortable. That is because Mercury is semi-square Uranus. Mercury is your ruler. So when it's semi-square Uranus, something might just suddenly occur to you, and it's obvious. You wonder why you didn't understand it earlier, but now you get it. And when you do understand something in its entirety, there might be a little bit of a shock, but you'll get used to it, and it will just fill in a gap. But something hadn't made sense for a long time, but now it does make sense. And there's no need to necessarily do anything about it straight away. I mean, Mercury has just started going retrograde. Mercury stays retrograde for the next few weeks. And so with Mercury semi-square Uranus, and in fact, Mercury went stationary retrograde on that semi-square to Uranus. So it's quite a powerful aspect. And it just may take you 3 weeks to incorporate everything and to really understand what is happening, but the basic surprise is happening right now. And that does mean that although you are very effective at the moment in terms of communication, you also know that some things shouldn't be talked about. You have this excitement, there are things you would like to say, but you know that now is not the right time, and maybe you'll just have to wait over the next couple of weeks for just things to settle. You have to wait for the right moment. But I don't think that should be too much of a problem. Libra, you seem to be a little bit uncomfortable at the moment. There seems to be something that's bothering you. I'm not quite sure what it is, but you feel that it's just lurking under the surface, and it's difficult, and you're just concerned where it's all going. And it's just possible, Libra, that you're picking up on other people's thoughts and worries, and you're making it all rather personal. And it's not necessarily your problem, but it feels like your problem. And your imagination could be taking you into areas that you don't necessarily want to go in. There might be a tendency, Libra, to think about worst case scenarios and to just assume that the worst case scenario is going to happen. And if that were to be the case, that really might restrict your actions. You just might feel that there are things you just can't do because you never know what might go wrong, or things that you can't say because you're just concerned. And it might well be the case that your intuitions are correct. If you feel that something is dangerous, then go with your feelings. And at the same time, do give some consideration to other people's actions. Other people in general are probably in a stronger position for you, whether it's other people in a group or one-to-one relationships. You just may feel that at the moment you are at a disadvantage. And that means that competitive situations, anything to do with conflict, should be avoided. Perhaps you should wait until you are in a stronger position. Though on the plus side, if other people are in a stronger position than you, then maybe you can take advantage of a situation. It's not always something where their gain is your loss. It may be that if there are areas where you are weak, where you don't have much control, you can get some outside assistance. And if you have a certain amount of humility and accept your own weakness, that in itself could be a strength, because then you might be creating a position where you can get help. And I'm not saying you need help, but it's always good to get help, especially if there's something you can't do, something you don't understand. And I do think that if you ask for help, I think that help will be forthcoming. And I should mention money, because the moon is in Scorpio, And Scorpio is the sign following Libra, and Moon is in mutual reception to Mars. And it does seem that, or feel that, other people know more about money than you. Now that could be a warning. If people are claiming to have financial knowledge that they don't necessarily have, you might believe them. So don't listen to what other people are saying about money, especially if you can identify how they might be able to benefit from the situation, indeed how you might potentially be able to lose from a situation. So that's one side of it. But on another side of it, some people are genuinely clever and knowledgeable about money, and there's no harm in getting their opinions. And that would especially be the case if you're working on Monday and there are financial issues come up that you just feel that you can't deal with on your own. Getting a bit of advice, getting a second opinion might be worthwhile. And if there's a sum of money you're looking for, or you feel that you've been ripped off, or somehow you want money and you want it back, then while it's true on your own you might not be able to get that money, it just might be that with another person's assistance you maybe you can. Scorpio, I do think that things are actually looking quite good for you at the moment. And one reason for that is that the moon is in your sign, or at least the moon is moving into your sign. If you're in Australia or New Zealand, it's not until late in the day that the moon moves into Scorpio. If you're in the UK, for example, then the moon moves into Scorpio 7:30 in the morning, which is pretty early, or 8:30 in the morning if you're in Rome or Berlin or Paris. If you're in the Americas, then the moon moves into Scorpio very early in the morning. In New York, it's that would be 3:30 in the morning, and just after midnight if you're on the west coast. And so with the moon moving into Scorpio, you're well placed, and there are lots of things you get. You just understand it, and you know what needs to be done. And there indeed just might be a sense of certainty that you don't have to get all the facts. That's not necessary. You just have to listen to your feelings and just get a broad picture. Definitely something you can do at the moment with the moon. Yeah, the moon being in mutual reception to Mars, and also you have to consider the impression you're making, because at the moment, Scorpio, I actually think you're making quite a powerful impression. People are listening to you, and maybe one reason people are listening to you is because they themselves aren't feeling particularly strong. A lot of people are feeling a bit sort of bashed up with this moon in Scorpio. It's not fitting everyone. Not everyone appreciates it, but you do. You appreciate it. You get it, and if you remember that other people are feeling under the weather, that does give you an advantage, because you can make a special effort to provide support and reassurance. Just by being there, just saying a few calming words, that's all people want to hear. And so if you want to get your way, you certainly can. If you want to make the world a better place today, many Scorpios are incredibly passionate, and they don't like to see bad things going on. They don't like to see people being miserable. And if you want to make the world a better place, Scorpio, I think that is absolutely something you can do. So trust your feelings, and if you feel that someone is in trouble or someone is hurting, then you're probably right. And furthermore, it does seem that there is very much something you can do about it. But elsewhere, don't be complacent. Don't feel you've got all the answers. You've got a lot of the answers, but there are still some things that you need to work out, that you need to discover, and today might be the day to do it. And one thing about the moon being in mutual reception to Mars, because Mars is your ruler, that's very nice, because moon and Mars are in each other's sign. And at the moment, when the moon is in Scorpio, it is also in mutual reception to Mars. And next time the moon is in Scorpio, in April, the moon will be in mutual reception to Mars. But Mars is getting later and later in Cancer. And in May, when the moon moves into Scorpio, Mars won't be in Cancer anymore. The moon will no longer have that opportunity to be in mutual reception to Mars. So that's a good reason to take advantage of today and to really find out things, find out what is possible. Don't be satisfied with what you know or what you believe, because there is a different way of looking at it, and you should be happy to discover that you might have got something wrong or that you've misunderstood something. You shouldn't feel it to be a personal slight. It should be a sense of growth and realization. So ask questions about yourself and your beliefs and your plans. And it's not necessarily the case that your beliefs or your plans have to be abandoned. They can be improved. There's always scope for improvement and for increasing your knowledge. So make sure, Scorpio, that you are able to take advantage of the situation. Sagittarius. The Sagittarius, you know that there are things that you really want to do, and you know you can do it. You can do it whenever you want. And if you want to change something today, you certainly can. And that doesn't mean, though, that you should. Sometimes it's fine just to be aware that you have a power, and then you don't have to exercise it. I mean, it maybe it's a bit like, if you've got a headache, I mean, maybe I'm just talking about me, but if you've got a headache, just having some paracetamol, or sort of Tylenol as they call it in the US, I don't know, just having access to the medicine is enough to fix a headache. Just knowing you've got that power, you've got that extra thing to take for your headache, you know it's there. You don't actually have to take the stuff. And, it can be the same, like going to the dentist and you've got a tooth hurting, and the dentist says, well, there is this antibiotic I could give you and it might fix it, and he gives you the prescription. It's just having the prescription is enough. You don't necessarily have to cash a prescription. And that's how it should feel today. You've got the power, and that should make you feel better, but you don't have to exercise it. And in fact, Sagittarius, I don't think it's a good time to exercise it. It might just be more trouble than it's worth. But the key thing is that you shouldn't feel that you're at a disadvantage. You can just look at things from a distance, maybe, and you can watch what other people are doing. And a lot of the work, if you're doing any work, is quite possibly taking place on an inner level. Just working things out in your own way, and, making observations. You see what people are doing. You are privately maybe judging them, asking yourself, well, really, is that really wise? I mean, you could try to give advice, but I think if you try to advise anyone, you could try, but I just wonder how successful you're going to be. Certain people have their own way of doing things. They're trying hard, and you may witness failure. Not your failure, we're talking about other people's failure. You might watch someone trying to do something and not being successful about it, and you want to intervene, but is it really going to make a difference? It could make a difference at a later stage, but maybe not today, maybe even not tomorrow. And it just may be a case, Sagittarius, where you have to wait it out and not be too fazed by what other people are doing and by what other people are saying. Some people are quite nervous that they have got something on their mind. They're not quite sure what they want to do, and they might try to dump their nervousness onto you, but you don't have to accept the projection. And you can try to help. You can try to talk to people about what's bothering them. But again, I'm not convinced that they will listen to you. So, Sagittarius, just don't take things too personally today. And the same might be the case for tomorrow. But sooner or later, things will change. I mean, the moon is in Scorpio. Soon enough, the moon is going to be in Sagittarius, and then things will change. Capricorn, you're in quite a friendly mood, at least in a relative sense. I mean, not everyone is going to be friendly and gregarious today, with the moon in Scorpio. A lot of people are going to want to keep things to themselves, and they might be afraid of saying too much and getting adverse publicity. But not you. I think that you're quite open-minded, and you're not afraid of what might happen, and you're quite happy to speak your mind. And if people like what you say, that's fine. If they don't, well, that's their problem, not yours. And in terms of your social life, there is something potentially quite intense about it. So if you are mixing with people, mixing with friends and associates and others, there may be a certain seriousness there, a seriousness that isn't always obvious, but it is there. And you'll get a feeling of the power of people's feelings, and also the power of people's desires. And you shouldn't underestimate how much some people want things. People really do want things, and they might try to hide their desires, but not today. You just have to talk to someone for just a few minutes, and you realize what they want, and that might have an impact on how you judge them. I mean, if you know what someone really wants, then you're in a better position to start to think about the extent to which you're prepared to trust them. What are they capable of doing? I mean, desire can be something that is very dangerous, but the desire principle, with the moon making a mutual reception to Mars, desire principle, really does matter. And as far as relationships are concerned, one-to-one relationships, it may be a day where certain people do have to be taken into consideration, because Mars has been in Cancer for some time. Cancer is, of course, your opposite sign, and the moon is making a mutual reception to Mars by sign. And moon is also making a conjunction to true black moon Lilith. And that conjunction between true black moon Lilith may say something about other people, about partners, the people close to you, and it could be quite something quite intense that another person is trying to deal with. And if they're in denial about that, well, it's still going to manifest. So if you find another person's behavior or reactions a bit strange, it might be to do with that moon conjunct true black moon Lilith. And you're perhaps seeing the real person. But because of that moon-Mars mutual reception, I think that relationships really can prosper. And one reason is because you understand the person you're dealing with, and you understand their complications, their emotional complications. I mean, people are complicated, regardless of who they are. And today, those complications might be fairly close to the surface. Aquarius. The moon is in Scorpio, and the moon in Scorpio has a certain feared quality. People are afraid of the moon in Scorpio. Maybe it's because the moon is fallen in Scorpio. And I don't know what you think about the moon in Scorpio, but right now, the moon in Scorpio should work in your favour. Don't think there's any problem with the moon in Scorpio, especially as the moon is in mutual reception to Mars. So moon and Mars are in each other's signs, and I take the view that that really should help Aquarians. Aquarians are going to have a strong sense of what they want, and Aquarius is a fixed sign. Once you've got it into your mind that you want something, you want to get it. And Moon Scorpio is also in a fixed sign, and with that mutual reception in Mars, with that mutual reception with Mars, you can. So I think Moon in Scorpio works in your favour. And the question is, how do you get what you want? Well, you get what you want. Well, you have to start with having the desire. You have to know what you want to begin with. And that's something you have to work out. And, after that, you have to proceed through the logical steps. It's not a day when you can get what you want straight away, just like that. It has to be done in a way that is systematic. You go through one stage after another stage. It does take a lot of work. The process of getting what you want could be somewhat boring, but it is the desire that takes you through. And that word desire does come up a lot in my readings for some of the 12 signs. And, for you, we've got the moon not just in mutual reception to Mars, but also the moon is square Pluto. And that moon square Pluto is important. Pluto is a planet, of course, is in your sign. Moon in a prominent angle, making a square to Pluto, does mean that you can really make things happen. And the moon is also making a conjunction to true black moon Lilith in a prominent angle of your chart. And that true black moon Lilith could be about your own unpleasantness. We're all capable of being unpleasant. And could be quite ruthless. If you want something, is it at someone else's expense? And it could relate to the past. Perhaps there is a feeling of resentment about something you didn't get in the past, and now you want to make up for lost time. Additionally, that moon conjunct true black moon Lilith may be about what you encounter today. And you may encounter things that are unpleasant. It's possible. That have a certain darkness to them, true black moon Lilith. It's not a problem. It's not going to stop you getting what you want. It's just something you might just encounter just over the course of a day. It happens. And I said beginning of this piece on Aquarius, that it's just important to be methodical if you want to get what you want. If you're not methodical, if you are in a hurry, then it's a different picture. Then things might go wrong. You are slightly accident prone today, and if you're in a hurry, you want everything at once, then you're probably not going to get it. In fact, it could be a little bit of a disaster because you were in a hurry. But you don't have to be in a hurry. Aquarius is a fixed sign, as I said. Moon is in Scorpio, fixed sign. Square Pluto. Pluto's in Aquarius. So just be slow and persistent. Keep moving closer and closer to the object of your desires. And, in the end, there's absolutely no reason why you can't get what you want. And also, don't feel that you have to ignore other people. The Sun is making a conjunction to the North Node. And the North Node is quite fortunate, you could say, traditionally, because the North Node, well, in traditional Western astrology, is, at least the traditional Western astrology that I've come across, the North Node is of the nature of Jupiter. And the Sun is a planet or a body that has a relationship to your opposite sign of Leo, and Sun conjunct North Node might represent a person who is honourable and of good reputation, who in some way can be of assistance. And you therefore, you don't have to do everything alone, on your own. And the good advice is possibly available. But of course, you've got to ask for it, and you don't want to be too stubborn. If you move in a particular direction and you don't perceive any possibility of change, it's good to be a steamroller, it's good to be a juggernaut, but there comes a point where you might not know anymore what you're doing or why you're doing. And so getting a little bit of advice from someone who has a good reputation, a good track record, someone who is honourable, it could really help you in terms of not just getting what you want, but also feeling happier, comfortable, and more confident. Pisces, it's nice that the moon is in Scorpio. It's not nice for everyone, but I think it's nice for you. Moon is in a water sign. You're a water sign. Moon is in mutual reception to Mars. You've got Moon in Scorpio, Mars in Cancer. Moon and Mars are in each other's signs, and in terms of Pisces, there's actually a lot of activity in Pisces because we've got Sun, Saturn, Neptune in Pisces as well as the North Node. So the water signs are well represented today, and that does mean that there's a certain fluidity. Things move without having to be pushed, and all you have to do, Pisces, is just become part of it all in that Pisces way, the fish flowing with the tide, and it just naturally happens. And you just have also just a natural power. You can feel your power, but it doesn't require dramatic initiatives. You just tell yourself what you want, and you just go with it, and it works out. And also with this moon making a mutual reception to Mars, Pisces, it's important that you trust yourself, and you trust yourself to make the right decisions. In fact, you shouldn't be spending ages and ages trying to work out what to do. It should actually be quite apparent. You listen to your feelings. Your feelings are informing you, and then you just know what needs to be done, and you also know where your limitations lie. You just know or feel that there's something missing, and so you take action to cover the gap, and it just happens quite naturally. And today you're able to pick up on things really, very quickly, and also you have a realization of knowing what you don't know. You just know what you don't know, and because you know what you don't know, you know what questions to ask, and you are informed. And once you've got the information, that has an impact on your actions and on your decisions, and so things just move, and they don't have to be forced. But at the same time, you can be a considerable force. You are a force to be reckoned with, but you don't have to use that force. It's just the power of your personality, and also there's something about you that is quite calming and reassuring, and people like that. And that means that 99 times out of 100, you can get your way without having to try. And really, it's as simple as that. And those are my forecasts for the 12 signs. And now I want to look at today from the viewpoint of the I Ching. And I asked the question, what is Monday going to be like for those watching the I Ching section of this video? And the first hexagram I got was hexagram number 28, which is the preponderance of the great. We haven't had this hexagram for some time, and its meaning is kind of obvious by looking at the hexagram. And so if you look at that hexagram, you can see that you've got 4 unbroken lines in the middle, and then you've got on top and bottom, you've got the broken lines, and those top and bottom lines can be regarded as being like handles, and those 4 unbroken lines in the middle are like a dead weight. So I conceptualize this hexagram as like being a sort of a granite block, maybe one of those things they build pyramids with, and it's got these wooden handles, and these handles, you have to ask, are they really adequate for the job? And so preponderance of a great means there is a great undertaking that you have to do. You are aware of it, and it's really difficult. It feels really difficult. And the advice is that you can do it, but it's going to be tough, especially at the beginning. And we talk about the beginning because the bottom line moves. And so with the bottom line moving, it's telling us that preparation is everything. Things have got to be very carefully prepared, and we have to be aware of our weaknesses. And those weaknesses could come from 2 sources. Firstly, we're at the beginning of a journey, and so at the beginning of a journey we don't really know what's involved. Secondly, our own position might be fairly lowly, again in a relative sense. We just don't necessarily feel that we have the authority, the power, or the respect, and it may feel that other people know more about something than we do. So we start at a certain disadvantage, but because we understand that disadvantage right at the beginning, that means that we are extra careful. When I did my forecast for the 12 signs, for several of the signs I suggested it might be a good idea to get some advice, and maybe that's what we need to do. If we don't understand something, see what see what someone else has to say. And in terms of our own resources, we absolutely must not be in a hurry. We just have to gather these resources and just recognize what we're dealing with. There's no reason why we can't achieve it, but it's just going to take longer than expected, and it's going to be more difficult. And as it stands, we might not have all the knowledge that we need. Now, this hexagram, it moves, and it moves to hexagram number 43, which is breakthrough. Now, that's one way of looking at it. Breakthrough, you get the idea that something's difficult and then suddenly you make a breakthrough. But that's not necessarily what the I Ching means. And one view of this hexagram is that we have to get out. Get out before it's too late. The enemy, whatever that enemy is starting to run rampant. There's reference to hearing the cries of prisoners as they get captured by the enemy army. We're not captured, but we hear the cries of the prisoners. So we can see that other people are in distress. The I Ching, by the way, does not tell us to go and help them. That's not the advice that I Ching gives. It just says get out. And so it could be that we're involved in quite a difficult task, and we're trying our hardest, and it's just at the beginning. But it may just be at a certain stage we realize that this is not going our way. And if we continue with it, things could get from bad to worse. And that's especially the case if it's a competitive situation. And so in that case, breakthrough does indicate we just need to accept the inevitable and look after ourselves and perhaps drop what we're doing, stop compromising ourselves and leave, and we'll be okay, because there is enough time to escape. And now I want to consider the horoscope of this Ukrainian nationalist who was murdered on Friday. I was looking at the internet, and a lot of sources, I think including Wikipedia, said he was murdered on the 13th, but he was actually murdered on the 14th. I went to great lengths to actually verify that, and on a closed circuit television, where of him being a picture of him being shot, you could see that it was the 14th. Most news reports say the 14th, but a few say it's the 13th, but it was the 14th. And so here is his chart. So let's find his chart. Again, I don't have a time of birth for him. I double-checked his birthday. His Facebook page is still there. I scrolled down until I got to October the 6th to just really check that that was indeed his birthday. And so here is his horoscope of Demyan Hanul. Apologies for if I've mispronounced it. Sometimes it's spelt with a G, at least when it's put into Latin characters from Ukrainian. But I think H is the most standard thing. So he has a Facebook page, Demyan Hanul. I said he was murdered on Friday the 14th. At I think the final shot was at 10:28, 56. I mean 56 seconds. At least on the CCTV's time was right. I mean, I don't make a habit of dredging the internet looking for pictures of terrible things happening, but it's I'm afraid it's widely available. And so he has a Facebook page, and Demyan Hanul is a fanatical, or was a fanatical Ukrainian nationalist. He, as far as I can tell, although he was associated with one of these sort of paramilitary groups, the right sector, I don't think he's necessarily served on the front. And it may be that he was regarded as being more useful in terms of mobilization. He was, I believe, actively involved in the mobilization campaign in Ukraine. Now, that could have just be involved with rounding people up. And he was present on May the 2nd, 2014, when the trade union house in Odesa was burnt down, and there were a lot of Russians or pro-Russian anti-Maidan group were held up in a trade union building, and he was there. Now, from a Russian perspective, this is seen just as a massacre. The Ukrainians killed them. The Ukrainians have a different narrative, that there was just a fight. The Russians were Russian supporters, or the anti-Maidan group were throwing petrol bombs, and they were having petrol bombs thrown back at them, and so it just happened. So there are different narratives there, and I'm just trying to be as unbiased as possible. He was there, and he's obviously very anti-Russian. He hates the idea of there being pro-Russian monuments relating to perhaps to the revolution. I mean, if you look at his Facebook page, you find it particularly disgusting that there was a monument in Odesa to the victims of the Kursk submarines. Remember, in 2000 you had that nuclear submarine sank in the Arctic. All the crew were killed, and he thought it was just disgusting that there was a monument to the people in Odesa. Why didn't they have a monument to the Ukrainians who were killed at this particular event or that particular event? And so that was part of his Facebook page. But you saw other aspects of him. He was a new father, and so it's sad that someone has been killed just after his son, I think, was a few months old. So there is definitely a sort of human face to him. And also there was, if I got this right, he was moaning about development, that they were wrecking the Odesa coastline with development. And that's a problem that we're all aware of, people wrecking the environment, and certainly having to build everywhere. And the fact that he seemed to be concerned about this, and he was, if I've got this right, was trying to take action to stop this development, I would have said was quite laudable. And as far as the connection between him and Putin, obviously he can't stand, or wasn't able to stand Putin, but there was this video of him in his car, and the car in front, there was a dog around the car, and he thought that this person had just let their dog loose, was in the process of abandoning their dog, and he started to chase this car down, because as far as he was concerned, it was just completely outrageous that someone could mistreat an animal like this. And if on his sort of Ukrainian Wikipedia, which I was able to press to translate into English button, he was apparently really into animal rights. And that links with Putin, because there's this picture with Putin. Putin was, I think, some Central Asian country was handing him a dog, a new puppy, and was picking up this dog by the scruff of its neck and handing it to Putin. And you could see from Putin's face that Putin was disgusted. That's really my understanding of it. But this man was treating this dog so badly. And of course, Putin is really into his dogs, and I think he's really quite into dogs being treated quite well. So Demyan Hanul potentially has something in common, and something laudable in common with Vladimir Putin. So here is Demyan Hanul's horoscope. So he was born on October the 6th, 1993, and clearly this is someone who was very charismatic, and we can see his charisma from his son. I mean, he's a Libra, like Vladimir Putin. Putin is also a Libra. I don't think one can say that Librans in themselves are into animal welfare. Maybe they are. I don't know. It's not an association that I automatically make with Sun in Libra. Maybe not. Maybe because it's a very human sign, Sun in Libra, and it's the midpoints of his Sun in Libra which is interesting. So if you notice, he has got a Mercury-Mars conjunction in Scorpio, a very close Mercury-Mars conjunction in Scorpio. I'll talk about that in a moment. And there's Venus. So his Sun is on his Venus-Mars midpoint, and it's on his Mercury-Venus midpoint. So Sun on the Venus-Mars midpoint is someone who is charismatic, certainly can be charismatic, and certain people find his presence attractive, someone they want to follow. And also Sun on the Venus-Mercury midpoint, means he's got a lot to say for himself, and he is someone who is a great sort of communicator. And again, if you look at his Facebook page, it is huge. He just goes on and on and on. He's posting all the time. And that might be his Mercury-Mars in Scorpio. That was his Mercury-Mars in Scorpio. Mercury is about communication. Mars is about the anger and the energy, communication in general, but also Scorpio, Mars in Scorpio has strong feelings, strong beliefs about right and wrong. So that would explain why he goes on and on about things he doesn't like. Not just Russians and his fanatical support for Ukraine on his Facebook page. And as far as the elemental balance is concerned, he's quite an air person, having Sun, Jupiter, Moon. Although we don't know we have his time of birth, he's definitely got Moon. He'll definitely have Moon in Gemini, Saturn in Aquarius, and so he's kind of an ideas person, and he likes playing with ideas. And maybe in his case, the ideas and the philosophy behind it, it's all got a little bit mixed up, but at some stage he's just got this idea about what is right and what is not, and he's prepared to talk about it endlessly and have his little bugbears like these monuments. He wanted to get rid of any monuments relating to the Soviet Union, and he didn't like it when people spoke Russian, and I think you could say that he, maybe like many people in the West, has sort of misunderstood the subtlety of his own country. I think that with Ukraine, it's a complicated country which has certainly a Russian-speaking minority. Is it even a minority? I don't know. I don't think it is a minority necessarily. But it was a country since its independence that did have a lot of people who had a certain loyalty to Russia, hence that monument to the victims of the cursed submarine. And so it needed to be treated with a certain amount of caution. It wasn't just about Russia trying to dominate the Ukraine. It was about there were genuine differences, and it was almost a tribal sense in it, although maybe it's tribal not like sort of in an ethnic sense, but in terms of loyalties, there was a tribal sense there. And that distinction needed to be respected, and hence it was sort of neither west nor east. And then America barges in and tries to take Russia into its sphere of influence. And of course, you had in 2014, you had America basically supported a coup against an elected government. And what that was doing was just messing up that delicate balance in Ukraine. And straight away, those tribal differences, maybe that's one way of dealing with it, apologies if I've used the wrong word, but suddenly became real, very real. And that's why you had the war start. And it's not just about Russia deciding one sunny day that it wanted to invade Ukraine. It's far more complicated than that. And part of it is about the Americans just, people like Victoria Nuland, just deciding to ignore those subtleties. I'm sure Victoria Nuland knew about those subtleties, but she didn't care about them. She wasn't prepared to consider them. And now we've seen what has happened. And being upset about a monument to the victims of Kursk suggests to me that Demyan Hanul wasn't really aware of the subtleties in his own country, and how that the Maidan revolution in 2014, sponsored by the US, caused so much damage. And from an outer planet perspective, he was born with a Uranus-Neptune conjunction. I mean, that Uranus-Neptune conjunction is somewhat otherworldly. I mean, one way of looking at Uranus-Neptune, the Uranus-Neptune conjunction, is to see it in terms of the elimination of the waking consciousness, and it's barely conscious. But Neptune is about the fantasy. Neptune in Capricorn is about some kind of fantasy of material power, material control, and with that Uranus conjunct Neptune, he became part of that fantasy and was influenced by that fantasy. And his sun is widely, well, not too widely. He's got Sun square Neptune, Sun square Uranus, so he, to an extent, picked up on that. And additionally, his Mars-Saturn midpoint. His Mars-Saturn midpoint, you can see his Mars-Saturn midpoint here. So there is his Mars, there is his Saturn. So what is the midpoint of Mars and Saturn? Well, the midpoint of Mars and his Mars-Saturn midpoint is going to you can actually see it by eye, and this is a very important point about him. You'll see that his Mars is about 24 degrees from 0 degrees Capricorn. Saturn is 24 degrees from the 0 degrees Capricorn. So what that means is that he has 0 degrees Capricorn on the Mars-Saturn midpoint. In other words, Mars and Saturn are on each other's anticia. So if you reflect Saturn through 0 degrees Capricorn, that 0 degrees Capricorn, 0 degrees Cancer axis, if you reflect that Mars, you reflect Saturn, you reflect it onto Mars. If you reflect Mars onto Saturn, you do it. So basically, the Aries point is square the Mars-Saturn midpoint, and the Aries point is about the world, what you can do to the world. I mean, Zelensky has the Aries point aspecting the Mars-Saturn midpoint, and it can be about someone who is able to inflict an enormous amount of destruction. Victoria Nuland has the Aries point aspecting the Mars-Saturn midpoint. In fact, Princess Diana also, because Victoria Nuland and Princess Diana were born on the same day. And I think it was a German dictator who had Aries point, who had Aries on the Mars-Saturn midpoint. And so it's a very destructive thing, having Aries on the Mars-Saturn midpoint, and it means that he becomes wound up with society and wound up with the destructive things going on around him in the country in which he is living. And it is difficult, and you can see that it might also be an obsession with death and destruction, and Russians dying, and drama and war, celebration of war, celebration of conflict. That can all be how Aries on the Mars-Saturn midpoint. How the Aries point, indeed the solstice point in this case, on the Mars-Saturn midpoint. And there are other things going on in terms of outer planets. He was born with a Saturn-Pluto square. So again, this is someone who's very much born at a particular time. He was born, just after Ukraine's independence, a couple of years after Ukraine's independence, and Saturn-Pluto is about that tension. It is a very tense thing, having that Saturn-Pluto square, wanting change, wanting to fight against restriction as he sees it. And so maybe at some level he's just personalizing that Saturn-Pluto energy, and likewise, with that Uranus-Neptune conjunction and Aries point on the Mars-Saturn midpoint, this is what he was born into, and he got involved with right-wing politics, right-wing nationalist politics in Ukraine, and he was involved in the fire. So the fire. So it's It was this fire took place on May the 2nd, 1920, May the 2nd, 2014. And it was a big event. It's still a big event. And the day before his death, he died on March the 14th. Again, there will be reports on the internet that it was March the 13th, but it was March the 14th. And the day before his death, the European Court of Human Rights ruled on this. And the European Court of Human Rights said, in the case of Vyacheslav and others versus Ukraine, the court held that there had been violations of the right to life investigation on account of the authorities' failure to do everything that could reasonably be expected of them to prevent the violence in Odesa on the 2nd of May 2014, to stop that violence after its outbreak, to ensure timely rescue measures for people trapped in the fire, and to institute and conduct an effective investigation into the events. It also held that there had been a violation of a right to respect for private and family life in respect of one applicant concerning the delay in handing over her father's body for burial. So it's kind of interesting that Hanul was murdered the day after the European Court of Human Rights judgment. Now, here is the chart of the fire. I think when the fire started, I called it the Odesa massacre. Some would regard that as being putting the wrong kind of spin on it. Maybe it wasn't a massacre. It does kind of depend on your perspective, but there was a fire which I think around 50 people were killed, nearly 50 people were killed. And so here's a chart for probably the kind of time it started. And notice Pluto is at 13 degrees 30 Capricorn, right opposition America's Sun. America's Sun was at 13 is at 13 Cancer, and Jupiter's quite close to America's Sun at the time. Jupiter-Pluto, improvement. United States trying to assert itself, trying to take control over Ukraine. I mean, the reason this event happened was because of the US, ultimately, because of people like Victoria Nuland intervening and encouraging a coup. But anyway, that's not really the point. And so this is when the fire started. You can true black moon Lilith on the quite close to the midheaven if it's really started at 7:45 p.m. and we've got Mercury opposition Saturn, Uranus trine true black moon Lilith. So Mercury opposition Saturn could be about sort of bad news. And look at Mars. Mars is opposition Uranus. So you can see that it's quite a difficult time when that fire started. And Jupiter square Uranus is about upset, not just upset, but revolution. At the time in Odesa, you had there was a demonstration by pro-Maidan groups, i.e. pro-Ukraine, if you like. Ukrainian nationalists. There was a football match at the time between Odesa and Kharkov, and so that was happening, and there was a pro-Ukraine demonstration, and then there was a pro-Russia demonstration against that demonstration, and there was a pro-Russia tent city. But so the whole situation in Odesa at the time was very, very tense, and I don't want to go into the details because I don't want to sort of really get into those details. I don't want to get anything wrong. But it seemed that what happened was that a pro-Russian group that evening were barricaded inside the trade union building, and petrol bombs were thrown, and it caught fire. And that's how so many people died, and there were shots were fired, and it wasn't just pro-Russians that were killed, it was also pro-Ukrainians who were killed. So it wasn't just a one-sided event, but so it's the kind of event where people see it in different ways. and I don't want to express any opinion on that. But you can see that the Odesa massacre, or the Odesa fire, maybe I'm wrong to call it a massacre, was very dramatic, and we can see that astrologically. Now, Demyan Hanul at the time would have been pretty young. I mean, he was coming up to 20, he would have been only 20 years old. So this would have been a very formative event for him. And so, let's compare Demyan Hanul with what was going on that day. How excited or whatever he might have felt about it. And so, again, we don't have Demyan Hanul's time of birth, but his sun was approximately at 13 Libra. And that means that he had Pluto square his sun at the time. And there was also a Mars-Pluto square when the fire started. So that Mars-Pluto square was hitting his sun, and Uranus was opposition his sun. So there was his T-square involving Mars opposition Uranus, Pluto on the T, and it was really hitting it was hitting his sun. It was also roughly at the time of his lunar return. The moon was in Gemini. And so you can see why that fire, those events on May the 2nd were so formative for him. And it seems to be, at some level, he was quite excited by it and transformed by it. And of course it had implications because it potentially turned him into a target. I mean, there were other people who had been turned into a target, but he was making a big thing about it. He was very prolific, as we can see from his Facebook page. And just over 10, nearly 11 years later, he was shot. And here is the time for his death. And this is the time for the final shot. The CCTV video started with a man lying on the ground. It was actually quite similar. Reminded me of the video of when that insurance company executive was murdered in New York, and there was something sort of strangely undramatic about it. But of course, it was completely dramatic. And in the video, you see Hanul lying on the pavement, or the sidewalk if you're American, and he's lying there, and someone comes up to him, fires one shot, the pistol jams, and then he fires it again. And you can see that the time that happened, that second shot, I assume that was the shot that killed him. And that was at 10, according to the CCTV camera, that was 10:28:56 on March the 14th. So this is a chart, when it happened. And the thing about this chart is that it happened just after the full moon eclipse. You can see that the moon was at 24:44 Virgo. The sun was at 24:24 Pisces. So it was a very eclipse-like moment. And this murder has got a lot of news coverage. It was certainly a big event. And I think it's getting an increasing amount of coverage. And so if we look at the eclipse just before it happened, so the full moon, so the eclipse happened, I make it sort of around 5 to 9 in the morning, so just a couple of hours before the eclipse was exact. And at the time of the exactitude, Pluto was exactly on the midheaven. And so that may tell us what the experience was in Odesa. Of course, other things happen in Odesa. This assassination, this killing, is not the only thing going on. Odesa gets gets attacked by the Russians, by Russian drones and missiles. So it's just one act of violence amongst many in Odesa, but this particular act of violence seems to have caught the news, and hence the Pluto on the midheaven, and the fact that it happens just so soon after the eclipse, and with the death, then there is the question, what was going on in Hanul's chart? How did this impact him? So one might want to start with Hanul's solar return just before he died. Now, we don't have a time of birth because we don't have a time of birth. It's arguably of limited value looking at a solar return. But one thing I do notice is that the sun is at 13 Libra, and it's moving towards a square of Mars. So sun applying to a square of Mars in a solar return, that might indicate that there are problems. And it's also Mercury is applying to a square of Mars, and sun is actually applying to a true black moon Lilith. So you might look at those solar aspects and say, well, that does indicate that this could be potentially a difficult year. And then there are the transits to consider. And so these are the transits, when he died. So outer wheel, the positions of the planets at the time of his killing, and Uranus was at 24 degrees 2 minutes Taurus. His Saturn is at 24 2 minutes Aquarius. So he died when Uranus was exactly square his Saturn, no orb. And also this eclipse, we sometimes neglect minor aspects. And so this eclipse took place at 23:57 Virgo. So this eclipse was making an exact quincunx to his Saturn. So the moon was quincunx his Saturn, sun was semi-sextile his Saturn, and yes, Uranus was exactly square his Saturn. So it's Saturn. So clearly the Saturn really matters to him. And the Saturn, why did the Saturn matter so much? How would we actually see this? Well, it may be the fact that he has Saturn, because we already know that from a sort of a midpoint perspective, his Saturn he's got Mars Saturn. The Mars Saturn midpoint is on the Aries point, so maybe that makes that Saturn that much more important, and it may be linking with that midpoint, the fact that he does have Mars and Saturn on the Aries point, and that may be why Uranus hitting his Saturn was such a big event, was so powerful, was indeed the aspect that killed him. And additionally, we know that he was born with a Uranus-Neptune conjunction, and that Uranus-Neptune conjunction again is something that is very collective. It's not just about him; it's about the society in which he was born in. And Mars at the time of his killing was at 1855 Cancer. In other words, he had Mars fairly close to being opposition his own Uranus-Neptune conjunction. So it's kind of interesting in his chart that it's these outer planet connections, the aspect to his Saturn, this aspect to his Uranus-Neptune conjunction, which seems to have had a real impact in terms of his death. But of course, there's just limits to what we can say about it in terms of his death. Now, as far as who killed him, the Ukrainian narrative, maybe it's changing, was that it was the Russians or someone supporting the Russians. There are Russian supporters in Odesa. I mean, the Western view on Ukraine, it's just poor Ukrainians being invaded by Russia, and no one supports Russia. A lot of people support Russia. A lot of people support Russia, even in Odesa. And there was a train. Some months ago, there was a report about a train being derailed in Odesa, and because it was a Russian report, but they were saying, well, it's partisans that did it. So there are people in Odesa who support the Russians. We don't know how many. We haven't a clue how many. For all I know, it's a majority. There's another report saying it's 30%. I don't know, but there is certainly a minority, a large minority in Odesa who quite possibly wants to be part of Russia. So that view that it was a Russian hit, whether or not ordered by the Kremlin or some other Russian, that there is that view. There is an alternative view that the reason he died was because of he was very active in mobilization. The mobilization of people, of the forced mobilization of people, is not popular amongst many people in Ukraine. People being rounded up, grabbed off the streets, and he was part of it. And there was a certain sort of vigilante element here with Hanul, and it's quite possible that is why he was killed. So there are a number of reasons why he might have been killed, and it just might not have been just a Russian hit, as some have suggested. And one final chart I wanted to consider was his link, his link with Ukrainian nationalism and how that links to the collective. So, one of the fathers of Ukrainian nationalism is Stepan Bandera. He's venerated by the Ukrainian nationalist Stepan Bandera, and because Stepan Bandera, so to an extent, cooperated with the Nazis. He was anti-Semitic. He was anti-Polish. You think about all the massacres in Poland, or what was then regarded as being Poland, by Ukrainian nationalists. And Stepan Bandera, I think he was in the end, he was assassinated by the Soviets, I think in Munich. But so Stepan Bandera, major figure in Ukraine, and I just thought it'd be interesting to look at how he related to Demyan Hanul. Why was Demyan Hanul so obsessed with Ukrainian nationalism? So we've got Demyan Hanul, his chart in the middle, and we have got Stepan Bandera on the outer wheel. And Stepan Bandera was a Capricorn, and Stepan Bandera had a Mercury-Uranus conjunction. And Neptune, so Demyan Hanul has this Uranus-Neptune conjunction in Capricorn, and Neptune is very much what you want to sort of dissolve into. And so you could say that at some level he was picking up on Stepan Bandera through that connection between Neptune and the Mercury-Uranus conjunction. Plus, there is a Uranus connection. So Stepan Bandera had Uranus in Capricorn, and it's a case that Hanul was born around the time of Stepan Bandera's Uranus return. And I think there is this idea that if you're born on someone's Uranus return, you can be quite inspired by it. I mean, in my own case, I find, Alfred Witter, German astrologer, absolutely fascinating. And I'm beginning to really appreciate his system, and I use it more and more. I mean, I'm not a Uranian astrologer, but I'm really aware of it. And I mean, I don't know how many people are using Uranian astrology, but I was born in 1962, close to 84 years after Witter was born, and so I do feel great sympathy with Witter's system, and I sometimes think that Uranus return, or that Uranus connection that I have, my Uranus at 26-something Leo, and Witter had his Uranus at 26-something Leo. So Maybe there's a connection there, and that links a bit. But anyway, Stepan Bandera and Demyan Hanul, they have Uranus in closely lined up, and that may be part of the reason why Hanul finds him so attractive. Also, Bandera's Mars is at 24 Scorpio. They both men have Mars in Scorpio, and that Mars in Scorpio is conjunct Bandera, is conjunct Hanul's Pluto, and it's going to be square Hanul's Saturn. So you can perhaps see that there may be a certain sympathy between the two, but maybe I'm reading too much into it. That's often the problem with astrology. You just look for connections. You look for any connection, and statistically there are always going to be some connection. So maybe I'm reading too much into it, but I thought I'd give it a go. Anyway, that's all I'm going to say about the subject of Demyan Hanul. I've tried to be objective. Clearly, he had some good points. He was a man who was very charismatic. He liked animals. He was concerned about overdevelopment, but at the same time, he had a very unpleasant side to his personality, and that possibly was linked to his eventual death. And that's it. So thank you very much for watching this video. If you enjoyed this video, I'd be very grateful if you were to like it. If you're not subscribed, I'd be super grateful if you were to subscribe. If you want to buy me a coffee, there's a link in the description, and I will talk to you again tomorrow.